everyone, and welcome to the December edition of the French Cinémathèque. It's a collaboration between the Federation of the Alliance Française USA and Telescope Film. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're delighted to have you here. My name is Justine Barda, and I'm the founder and CEO of telescopefilm.com, which is a website for international film and TV. We offer a database of about 700,000 international films and series with links to where to watch them in the US. We also have a dedicated page on the site for French film and TV with information about what's new and what's popular from France, as well as curated selections. We are delighted to be collaborating with AFUSA, the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 25,000 learners of French each year learn French, live French, and love French. Here's a short video. We will put links to more information about both AFUSA and Telescope Film in the chat in just a moment. The French Cinémathèque usually takes place on the fourth Monday of every month, but next month, because of the Sundance Film Festival, we will be meeting on Monday, January 13th. So it's actually coming up fairly quickly. We'll be talking about the film Emilia Perez, which is a terrific new film from veteran director Jacques Audiard, and France's submission in the Best International Feature Film category at the Oscars. But our film for today is Lost Illusions. Before we get started, just a couple of brief housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking and stay on speaker view. To ask a question, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature at the bottom of your screen. I think it's in the reaction section, or you can put your question in the chat. If there are technical issues, you may want to leave the Zoom and then sign back in after a couple minutes using the original link. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channels, and the total runtime is 1 hour. And with that, I'd like to introduce our fearless facilitator, who is also the chief film critic for Variety, Peter Debruge. Over to you, Peter.
That's me, your fearless facilitator. Thank you, Justine. Nice to see some familiar faces here. I hope you guys enjoyed, those of you who joined us last month, our conversation. I'm sorry that it didn't leave room for the conversation portion of it, but I hope that the interview was kind of a nice way to mix things up a little bit. That was for the movie Chicken for Linda. Now, Lost Illusions is one of my very favorite French films of the last few years, and I think one that has been both recognized and celebrated, but not to the degree that I would have expected. And I'm curious to maybe hear the reactions here. Maybe I love this movie more than I should, or maybe you will agree with me that it kind of has been overlooked. It was nominated for 10 César Awards, and that sort of makes sense given the scale and kind of pageantry of it all. But I think it only won one of all those. No, it cleaned up. It did a decent number in some of the kind of lesser categories. It just didn't, win the top prize. It premiered at the Venice Film Festival. The director, Xavier Giannoli, has directed a few films. He'd kind of been on my radar. I did not actually attend the Venice Film Festival the year that this premiered, but I had been tracking him. He'd made a movie called Marguerite, which is the Florence Foster Jenkins story, kind of fictionalized and transposed to France with Catherine Fro. For those of you who may have seen the Meryl Streep version of that film, where it's a woman who has no singing talent whatsoever, but all the desire in the world to go on stage. And you could already sense from Marguerite, I think, the potential of this filmmaker. He'd also worked with Gérard Depardieu, who returns in a much smaller role here in a film. Actually, both lead actors from his film Quand j'étais chanteur, When I Was a Singer. It's in which Depardieu plays kind of a washed up, kind of louche lounge cabaret singer, piano bar type musician at the overweight tail end of his career. And Cécile de France is the young woman who kind of brings light in a last chapter to his life. But you have both of those actors reunited here in different roles, for those of you who recognize them. But speaking of recognizing people, who among you were with us for François Ozon's Summer of '85? You probably recognized our leading man, who, of course, appeared also in that film, Benjamin Voisin. So that's a little bit of context, but the real, the important probably bit of provenance with this film is not the director or the cast members or any of that, but it's the source material coming from Honoré de Balzac. And this is one of the prolific author's novels in which some of these characters kind of carry on into others. Some of them, for those who were kind of raised in French culture, are familiar and almost like household names. I had to sort of brush up a little bit on this myself, in the way that maybe some of you yourselves are kind of among are more familiar, or like a Rubempre type person, is already the fate of this character is so kind of understood in French culture that you can cite the name and understand the kind of social climb and failure that represents his arc. But so I kind of want to hear, this is a pretty basic question, but I just want to kind of like get a temperature gauge of how you guys liked the movie before we start digging into it. I think we can dig into some of the themes. I think you'll all agree that there's a way in which this movie, set in its time, resonates very powerfully with the moment we're in right now, with the media, right now being the last years. It came out in 2021, I believe. And of course, we're seeing daily changes kind of to the way that the media is evolving and responding to power and all of this. And even the idea that fake news, a term that was coined by Donald Trump, could just as well have been applied to the kind of journalistic scene that's depicted in the movie. But let's start with some strong feelings. If there's anyone who kind of really responded to the movie, whether it's pro or con, raise your hand, and I just want to kind of like hear your take before I start steering too much the conversation down different corridors. So I'm trying to get it on my screen in the view where I can see everybody, and I don't know why that's where I can see people's hands raised. Right now, Justine, I have you front and center on my screen, but how do I get the, there we
So I
go.
think you want the gallery view, right?
Got it. Okay.
Okay,
So
good.
who wants to jump in? I also realize not Sylvia, you've raised your hand. I also realize not everyone necessarily has had a chance to see the film or the whole film, but all right, Sylvia, tell us what you thought.
Well, I like the film a lot, to the point that I'm rereading the book at this point.
Wow. Okay.
And I thought it was a very good a picture of how France was at the time of the after Napoleon, when the monarchy comes back. And I think that there's, besides the subject of the media, which I also liked a lot, and I thought that it has really it sounds like, it could have been said yesterday. I like the social class differences and the way, and also the urban countryside opposition. How people who were in Paris would consider somebody who could come from Angoulême, like, oh, those rednecks, even if they were nobles, like, like Louise. But, they have this thing, like, she's told a few times by her cousin not to do this or not to do that, because, it would kind of looked weird in Paris. So I think that there are a lot of subjects. So I really like the film.
Yeah, yeah. That thing that you're describing there, I think one of the strongest scenes in the movie is the one of is it an opera or a symphony that they attend? Because it's very tricky to kind of capture that feeling, which we've probably all experienced in our life, of being judged and then becoming hyper conscious of kind of like every little micro sign you give, because it's fodder for your for the piranhas around you or whatever. But they really capture that moment. And of course, they this ridiculous hairstyle that Voisin, sports during that scene just kind of emphasizes almost the comedy of it. But that is part of it too, right? All the, later when you see him putting on the eyeliner and things, a lot of these codes
Yes.
are
The
silly to begin with.
conversations with Depardieu were very, very funny also, in a way, because, he
Right,
was
right.
an editor who couldn't read and who couldn't, who couldn't write either, of course. And so, but the exchanges were kind of fun in a way.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of humor, there's a lot of satire, there's a lot of tragedy. I mean, this is a very rich piece of material, and I'm envious of you that you have read it already the one time and are having the opportunity to read it again. I picked up the book when I saw the movie, but just haven't had the time to read it myself. I hope to one day. Pascal, I see your hand raised. Do you want to offer your two
Yeah,
cents?
yeah. So first of all, Sylvia probably said everything that I wanted to say. Um, we are definitely on the same page as far as liking the movie and recognizing all the different sub subjects that are really depicted very, very well. Not that I lived at that time, but it feels so real. Um, and you were mentioning one of your favorite scenes, and it made me think about one of my favorite scenes when when he writes his first papier, his first paper
Article or yeah.
in front of, what's her name? In front of his
You mean in front
future.
of the actress who becomes
Exactly.
his lover?
I
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. I love this scene just because it's, as if it would be a painter drawing her. And I thought it was well depicted and quite strong.
I agree. I mean, like I myself am a film critic, so on one hand, I find this portion of the movie very, very troubling. The way that they depict the kind of most compromised version of my profession that could exist. But it also romanticizes the power of my profession, which I do not experience in the slightest. That like you can make a career overnight or but also this idea that like what we're seeing over the course of the movie is Rubempre's kind of it's not just his illusions, but his ethics, kind of changing, right? And in this moment, he's able to do a kind of genuine rave because it's coming from a place of instant infatuation, right? But if you took away all of the corrupt aspects of this, he he's writing his heart out and he's painting her with words. It's a beautiful sequence. There are some really interesting scenes here, and I kept thinking how if I myself had read the book as Sylvia has, wondering how Balzac himself must paint a lot of these scenes. Like one in particular that I thought, oh, you can make this joke in cinema. How did he do it in the book? You know, when they introduce all the grisette, the different prostitutes who are, you know, kind of like selling their kind of bodies along that one stretch, and he talks about the half castor, and he says we never found out why they were called that, but the camera pans up and you can see that it's three men in drag. You know, it's like, how do you kind of communicate that kind of observation without having the visual answer to the rhetorical, you know, kind of question?
I haven't reread that part yet, so
I have a feeling
don't remember.
I have a feeling that the filmmaker is probably also bringing in his own context of history to, you know, embellish things that may or may not have been. There's something very modern, I think, about the way that this period is depicted. But who else? Anybody dislike the movie, or if maybe you liked it but it really got under your skin because it can be it kind of pushes certain buttons. All right, well, that'll get us started, I think.
I did have one, sorry, I had a comment real quick.
Yeah, please.
It was interesting the choices made in the adaptation. So there was a lot that was left out with Lucien's brother-in-law and all of the things about the printing trade, which more or less propelled him from the provinces to the city. And I wish that there was 5 or 10 minutes of the film devoted to not only his relationship in the provinces that took him into Paris, but also how he was trying to make his brother-in-law rich and make up for the miser that his brother-in-law had as father-in-law. So.
Well, can you, it sounds like you might have read it. Can you fill us in a little bit? Because, you know, they kind of treat it as if it's really more about Louise and the affair he's having with her that kind of whisks him into town. Is that only part of the picture, or did they change it?
It's only part of the picture. So it's a 3-volume set, and
Right.
more or less in the full Balzac human comedy, there's a provincial goes to Paris, and then a 3rd volume that Lost Illusions kind of incorporates. And so at the beginning, more or less, there's the story of this husband and wife who's trying to keep the printing business alive in the same place where the Lucien's mistress is. And the father-in-law keeps all of the business, all of the printing presses, takes away any chance of success. And so in desperation, Lucien is sent to Paris to come up with a new method to come up with a cheaper way to make paper.
Okay.
And so he wants to be a poet, but he also wants to be an innovator in publishing. And so there's these two kind of things pushing him back and forth. And he ends up going back to disgraced at the end of Lost Illusions when things don't work out in Paris. And so I would have loved if the movie had somehow been able to incorporate that, but it's 3 books in Balzac, so it's understandable why the choices were made as they were.
Yeah, but it is interesting. I mean, like this is already a kind of robust 2.5-hour feature, so they are, you know, fighting to get certain details in, and it makes you wonder why others they feel can be left on the floor. I would guess that to me, a lot of the questions that I'm left with are, it makes me, I like it when movies do this, when they make me want to go back to the book, or they make me want to read about the period and learn more because they've kind of lit my curiosity. But it seems like they're kind of leaning into the things that are either contemporary or kind of timeless, I guess. Less, you know, you get through narration, I guess, some of the things that are more about these evolutions. There was even, did anyone else think when they introduced the like pigeons and the way they describe it, you know, kind of like, I was like, oh, this is literally the first tweets, right? Like, I mean, like suddenly there's communication that's like accelerated and but it has to be written in teeny tiny scrolls as they're communicated back and forth between England and France. But it's kind of wild to see 200 years ago some of the same things we're complaining and dealing with now playing out, right? Pascal, I see your hand up, but that might be just from left from before. Is that
No, I took it down and then I put it
Great,
up.
okay.
Just because to what you were saying before and right now, a minute ago, about how they incorporated modern things. And it's I don't know if you're familiar with the theaters in Paris and also the name of the journals, the different newspapers.
Not really. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so there's some. It's funny to see it from the 2011 or whenever it was done, and it's the same as if it's 2024, to see first which theater lasted, are still up right now, because those are the names of real theaters that are still in Paris. And also the whole thing about the magazine and what you were saying about the tweets. There's this whole thing about the canard, the fake news that is called a canard, and this really stayed within the language, and then they played. So that's definitely not from Balzac because he couldn't foresee all of that, but they played with the name of the newspapers that are still here, or the one that came out of that time. So there's one that is very well known, Le Canard Enchaîné, and they make a game out of that when they were talking about that description of, what it is that a newspaper should be. And I thought it was clever, and also created a bridge with today and made the movie contemporary in a sense that we could relate to some of the information as if we were learning, no, as if I was learning things from where those words came from, and how those expressions just were born. That was pretty funny.
Remind me, do they explain the origin of the phrase canard in the movie, or they just use?
Yes. And the canard is what they say, if I remember correctly, is this thing that you have to go after a canard. You have to run after to grab it.
Okay.
And that was the image they were trying to keep. But it was also the definition at the time, apparently, for a fake news.
So is this newspaper, Le Canard Enchaîné, is that someone who is chased down one of these kind of like leads, and they've exposed the truth of it? Is that basically
exactly what it is?
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It was at one point, Le Canard Enchaîné was like the voice of the strong left of France.
Right.
I guess it still is, but anyway, that's that.
It seems really about like exposés and uncovering things now, I guess, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
you're right.
So I see a few other hands have gone up. Anthony, you raised yours first. Go ahead and add on.
I will, thank you. I have a couple of reactions I want to bring up. The first one is that I enjoyed the film, and I've never read Balzac before, but I get the feeling that he was really an excellent writer. I often find 19th century French writers difficult to read.
Yeah.
But I suspect I could read him. I may give it a shot. And again, the film was good. You know,
For
several
what it's
times,
worth, there's a very celebrated new translation out just a few years ago of Lost Illusions. So I picked that up, because when the movie came out with the intention of having more time than I do, but like you'll have maybe an even easier time because there's this this fresh translation of it. But go ahead.
thanks, I will take a look. I'm a big fan of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby.
Mhm.
And in Gatsby, he's kind of a poor boy, grows up to be a rich man due to bootlegging. He's a kind of a criminal, although in the 20s, bootlegging wasn't particularly a bad crime. And in this film is very similar. Lucien is kind of a corrupt journalist. So he's a poor boy from the village, moves to the big city, becomes a corrupt journalist, and then eventually, like a rags to rags story, he's back in the village. So I watched the film thinking that F. Scott Fitzgerald borrowed heavily from Balzac.
I mean, I am not a literary expert enough to know that, but it's an interesting kind of similarity that you've picked up on for sure. I mean, it is always interesting to see when you have writers using writers as characters, right? It's this is a conceit we see a lot in cinema where a lot of films will feature directors as their main characters or struggling screenwriters or whatever it may be there. But the here not only obviously does a writer know a lot about that world, but they have all of these insights, but they have a totally probably a much richer sense of nuance about kind of like the morals of everything. So when we see, I think one of the key moments in this movie where Lucien is paid to write a negative review of a novel he loves and how that plays out and how he kind of redeems himself and how that choice makes enemies of the people who had been his, early sponsors or whatever. And, that's kind of a turning point in the movie. But, you must understand that, of course, any audience will notice the moral dilemma there, but a writer who is probably well aware of the impact of negative criticism and the worst kind of criticism. As a critic, I can tell you, like, this unequivocally is insincere criticism. I mean, like, the only thing we have as critics is our opinion, right? I mean, yes, you have your ability to convey it eloquently or whatever, but like if you don't even stand behind the opinion you put forward, like I can't remember what movie it was. Oh, it was Wicked the other day. It's like I was not expecting to love Wicked. I adored it, as it turns out, and I wrote as much in my review. And a friend I've known a long time was like, "Hey, I saw what you wrote in your review, but like, what did you really think?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" But she was like, you can't really like it as much as you, or for in the way that you said, it's like I was holding back my cards, but but I mean, the point I'm making is that, that is kind of like the essence of what you're doing. So to me, that, that scene was a really interesting one to look at from the point of view of a writer writing this story and what it means to them. And I'm sure it's true in the adaptation of a filmmaker, kind of like looking at that too, because I think all of the theatrical stuff probably means more to the filmmaker Giannoli than it may have to Balzac, and may have even been emphasized a little bit more in the film. Sharif and Zainab, either or both of you?
Yes, it's me. What I noticed in the movie, and I did not only notice, but I learned from it, is the time period Balzac chose to tell his story. This story was written by Balzac in the late 30s, early 40s of the 19th century. But he chose the time period during what is called the Restoration, the Bourbon Restoration, when two Bourbon kings ruled France, which ended in 1830. So several years before Balzac wrote the novel. And I think at this turbulent years after Napoleon and until the Second Revolution, which deposed the kings again, it was a sort of a political chaos between what is called the Ancien Régime, the royalists, and the new bourgeoisie. And here we see in the film and in the novel how both are reacting to each other, and it showed, well, it pushed me into reading a little bit more about this period, and it was a very important period in the French history. The second thing that I noticed is that Balzac was very harsh about newspapermen at that time, while he himself was a newspaper owner and a reporter or a journalist. So this also drew my attention to the how somebody from the milieu sees what others do not see.
Yeah.
But the film was, I think, was very good.
Yeah, in a way, there was a movie called La Cocina that came out earlier this. It was at the Berlin Film Festival last year. I think it might have just come out, or it will be coming out soon. That it is quite good. It's contemporary. It's a Mexican director who worked in a restaurant in Los Angeles, and this movie is an adaptation of a play set in the kind of craziness of a restaurant. But it, like, that is literally a case of someone who kind of like knows the insanity of the process and the personal drama and the, you know, kind of unsanitary conditions and all of that go into preparing your food, and who is bringing that to his adaptation of this movie. And it's just wild. It's like a, you know, they're like, it could be like a battlefield at times, you know, it's that thing that we, you know, of literally bringing us into the kitchen. Would you still eat at that restaurant if you knew? And that's kind of what we're getting from Balzac here, right? Like, everybody reads newspapers or has at some point, but if we knew how they were put together, you know, how much would we trust them? How much maybe we would respect them more in certain ways and, you know, kind of dismiss them in others. And your comment, I think, makes me specifically think, I don't know the Balzac's own experience with, you know, newspaper ownership or working at one, but with the time difference you're describing, this is the end of a brief and very impactful era, you know, that we see what is the kind of dismantling of what's called the opposition press in the movie towards the end, right? Where the, you know, the kind of the state and the military come in and tear apart and burn all of the equipment and everything. So this, you know, this moment that he's depicting obviously is not the one that was existing still 10, 15 years later when he's writing these. Now, regarding the time period, the Human Comedy, which is this kind of monumental multi-volume project that Balzac undertook, spans a lot more time than just this. So we're finding this incredibly volatile and it's a moment just before a big transition, I guess, depicted in this particular story. But he's also looking at other things too. But he almost everything I know about this period, I know probably from this movie or the way that Balzac elsewhere has kind of shared some of these details. We might come back after hearing from Constance to some of the people who've read him. Sylvia, Jay sound like they might have some insights there. So if there's anything you two want to share, but Constance, what would you like to comment about?
Just briefly, I did enjoy the film. I have about 20 more minutes to go, which I will do after this. And it makes me want to read the book. I've never read Balzac. And I looked into him a little bit, and a brief note is he did add the DE to his name. His father's name was Balzac, but he added Honoré de Balzac to his name to help him fit into society a little better. I thought that's interesting.
Well, that adds an interesting insight, because adding that DE here is kind of the gesture that brings Rubempre crumbling down, right? Because you don't just decide you want to be nobility or of a higher class. It's a much slower process. It's one of the things that interests me so much about the contrast between being raised in America and what I understand about France from living there, from visiting, from watching, movies about it, is just that I think the class system is so much more codified in France, and this movie is all about that. I mean, in some ways, you could almost say almost all French art is in some way about that. It's like, in a way that I think sometimes in America, it's there, but it's much more fluid. America is kind of built on this premise of the idea that within a single generation, not even a single generation, like within overnight, you can kind of leap from one station to another. It doesn't happen to everybody. It's not necessarily easy, but it's like it's possible, right? And where in France, even if you do have the kind of windfall that allows you to do that, let's say you marry well, or you earn a fortune through industry or something like that. This is why Americans look to the French language to describe the tacky behavior of the nouveau riche, right? It's this very condescending term for people who were not born into the station that they're now enjoying, when that station is above their, kind of like, and built into that is this whole complicated, set of assumptions that descends from the idea of royalty even, right? Like if royalty is some sort of special anointed God decided class, and then the nobility, the aristocracy, the peasants, all these kind of things, it's like it's always very interesting. And this movie is about a climber, but it's kind of done in a way where we identify with him, we're rooting for him, and there comes a point when it starts to take a turn against him, and I think we can even feel that maybe he has stretched too far. We might want to see him succeed, but we also kind of understand that there's just too much friction, right? Kind of opposing him. But you will see, without ruining the end for you, that that he's fighting that up until the end of his story here. But Zainab, go ahead.
I think that this also applies to I'm referring to the movie The Age of Innocence,
Yes, yeah, that's
yeah. And so I mean, if you transcend the idea of aristocracy and the bourgeoisie and all that, cliques, they will fight outsiders no matter what, to whip people back in line. And in some cases where there is corruption in a workplace or an office, and this is modern day stuff. I mean, it's not 19th century or early 20th century or anything. And somebody refuses to take part, they make him steal with them so that he doesn't become an outsider. He is an insider.
I see.
The day. And so I think the age of innocence also whipped people back in line. It is the conflict between whoever is in power, whether it's the aristocracy or the moneyed people or this or that. I think this is where the conflict emanates.
Yeah, it's interesting. Edith Wharton is, as a novelist, also someone who is hyper attuned to the nuances of all of these shifts in class, the kind of rules, the etiquette. One thing that I think is very interesting about the difference between American culture, English culture, French culture. In France, I think it's fascinating how flagrant the sexual indiscretions are in this story. The idea that like everybody's kind of expected to have extramarital affairs, but there are still rules and ways in which those have to be played. Whereas in Wharton and in let's say filmmakers like the Merchant Ivory movies, it's kind of about restraint and the incapacity to act on, in a desire or an attraction, like something like Remains of the Day, for instance, or but here we see kind of he's genuinely in love with this mistress, but it's not realistic that he'll get to run off with her, right? He ends up with another mistress, the actress, and yet almost immediately is off, kind of at seeing courtesans or having affairs on the side. And it's all part of that society. I don't mean to imply any kind of judgment other than it's interesting to see it kind of like out in the open differently. But Age of Innocence is a really interesting comparison. And, I think in the American upper class and in certainly all throughout Europe, in England, absolutely. Remains of the Day, by the way, is, if we're talking about that as another thing to look at, is, about class. And yet here you have something where you have two servants who are presumably of equivalent stature, who can't act on their attraction there. But we had a question, I think, for Jay or Sylvia. I don't mean to put either of you on the spot, but like it sounds like you have some expertise maybe in having read. I don't know how much of Balzac you've read, or but I'm not so familiar. I wish I knew better, but my understanding is that the Human Comedy is kind of a chronological saga that spans a lot of time rather than dwells on any one period from different points of view. But I don't know if anyone is expert enough to corroborate or not on that.
I read all those books or parts of those books when I was in high school, so
Distant memory. Yeah,
it's not here.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I'm rereading it. But I don't agree that there's such a difference with the American society. It's just that
Okay.
if you read Newman Capote, know that there are some rules and they are the outsiders and they are it's just that we are not usually in contact with that people, at least me being a teacher,
100%.
I'm not in
Yeah.
contact with those people. So I'm not. It seems the society here is more I don't know. The differences, you can see them in different ways. Some, in what college you went to, and if your family came on the, was part of the the first boat who
Yeah,
came
yeah,
here, or you are in the second boat or third boat or whatever. So it's just different.
That's a totally fair thing. And it's like I moved to New York after graduating college and lived there for a few years. And suddenly I was confronted with that scene in Lost Illusions reminded me of ways I felt at times in New York, where it was just kind of like I didn't know this was even a thing, and the that thing that you're naive to is that you can walk into a space being sincere, being yourself, and not realize that you're being read and judged by codes that you may not even be aware of. I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but I remember a friend of mine who worked in the fashion industry in Paris was telling me there's like, you tell me if I'm right, I'm not a woman, but like there's a hand that a woman holds her handbag in and it matters. And I was like, it would never occur to me, that but it's like it's incorrect to not have it in the correct hand in Paris, at least. Is that true? I mean, like, I would have just assumed it was right or left-handed, or like if you're answering the phone or who knows what. But it's these things that are so subtle, and like someone gets taught that, and it's how you hold a spoon, and it's like, whether you shave or like, all of these kind of things, what you do to your nails, your shoes, all of these things, right? And I love the way this sequence in the movie kind of conveys that feeling without necessarily our having to know all those gestures. Although I did pick up on one, Constance, I see you, and I'm gonna come to you in 1 second. I did pick up on one because I was talking to a colleague who has like a kind of friend of the family staying with them, and he said that whenever he introduces him in public, he said, "This is my nephew," when it's really a much more complicated backstory. But it's like, but he said he does that, and yet he knows that some people read a nephew or daughter, whatever, like as code for lover or something like that, when that obviously when it is either a family member or someone where that's not the case, is a really awkward and uncomfortable assumption to have someone putting on you. But I noticed that with the godson in the movie, which I don't think I even had the tool in my head until I learned that anecdote. That's exactly what's going on in that scene, right? Like where she introduces her godson, but in this case, her godson literally is her lover, and godson becomes the kind of public-facing euphemism for how she's introducing, and everybody there knows how to see through that ruse and can go along with it or not, Constance, go ahead.
I'm honored to mention there's an excellent film called Ridicule from
Sure. Yeah.
1997. It deals a lot with the bon mot, the how to speak properly, and a lot of that was in this film also between the writers themselves.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. That that idea of power inviting criticism, almost, is one thing I was thinking rewatching this movie this weekend is, I mean, I don't want really to make this political, but but there's conversation in the air right now, about kind of like what will become of the press. Let's put it that way. And it's like, and we saw just this weekend ABC News make this kind of like multi-million-dollar settlement to Donald Trump, you know, and it makes me kind of wonder that scene that it comes late in the movie where the soldiers are coming in and demolishing everything. You know, it's like where that didn't resonate with me 2 years ago. It feels like we might be entering a moment where there's just a kind of crackdown, I think, on the opposition press. Now, the funny thing about thinking of it as the opposition press is right now, the words we use to describe what is the opposition press is the mainstream media, right? Which suggests quite the opposite from the opposition. But you know, I think there's definitely a tide shift going on here, and it'll be interesting to see. It's always interesting when a story from 200 years ago can kind of like rhyme with or foresee stuff that's in the air today. But let's see, what else is kind of interesting about this? Let's talk about the theater scene. I don't know if any of you have ever been actors or involved in the stage, but what did you make of that? I was kind of horrified by you know, the behind the scenes side of things, but also again reminded of maybe of things we see today. I agree, Sylvia. La claque, you're talking about the man or his invention, the man himself. So he's like, you know, paid to like, you know, start the applause or not. And I'm sure that there are probably very sophisticated devices we don't even realize
I
that.
think that it must exist, you know, people booing or people standing up or people, you know, applauding. Yeah.
And the idea of kind of like paying to make sure that the reaction turns out the way you want. And then what's interesting is how it can backfire, because the turning point in the movie, Constance, you probably got that far or maybe not, is like, you know, when he's arranging for the reception of his girlfriend's kind of debut, right? Like the idea that he's sure that he's kind of organized everything perfectly so that it'll go his way, and then it turns out it's really just for the highest bidder. Deidre is saying in the chat window that when you attend live performances for TV and radio, the applause cues are the same thing, which is true. Like when they flash, like, you know, if you've gone to a game show taping, or have any of you ever been to a taping of a live event? I remember the first time I went, the thing that amused me so much is they warm you up, right, with like a stand-up comic beforehand to get you laughing so that you're going to be more likely to laugh when this was like a Bill Maher show that I went to years ago, like I think it was Politically Incorrect or whatever it was before. And but they also taught you how to laugh into applause, which is like if you're feeling the laughter, like why not, you know, just kind of like show it with some clapping too, you know? And so they're like kind of coaching you on how to do that thing. And it's, you know, but it is using, you know, live bodies, warm meat or whatever in the seats to kind of create the canned version that sitcoms have been using out of a box forever. And that canned laughter is kind of what we see the La Claque come up with the whole elaborate invention with the like, you know, things under the seats, right? But the thing that was heartbreaking to me was the idea that the fate of a play or a performer or something like that could live or die on the whims of, you know, any number of these different things. And I have a feeling that maybe one reason my profession of film critic is not so beloved in the world is that it may seem as capricious as that, you know, to people who are actually the creators. But Deidre, go ahead.
Thank you. I enjoyed the film, but I found some elements of it somewhat challenging. The one thing we haven't talked about is the role of the women. I saw someone made a comment that they thought that the cousin was incredibly capricious, which I would agree. But the role of women in French society at that time and the disparity between Collier and his original lover, I forget her name. I think it's
Louise.
Barb. Yes, thank you. And that I realized the film was about Lucian, but I would have liked to see a little bit more about their status because at the end of the day, all of this happened because he was betrothed and I'm sorry, he was unrequited love to a
Plotted.
certain degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think she truly did love him, but I don't think the circumstances would have been the same had he not fallen so heavily in love with her. And had she fallen so heavily in love with him, there's a love story there, and it's a tragic one on both sides. And we really haven't talked about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the one of the challenges for women at this moment there is that they really don't have much agency in society. I mean, you were either married, and that's kind of Louise's predicament. You know, she's in a loveless marriage to when I think when Lucien describes it as letting her kind of like waste away or something like that. That's kind of her situation, right? She's a pretty canary in a cage for the Baron, and he comes along and flatters her with sincere but poetry that we're later led to believe these Marguerites, like are maybe a little naive and country bumpkin, like when we see Vincent Lacoste later, kind of teasing about no wonder she left you. It's implying it was the quality of the poetry. But it's also interesting to contrast that with the working class women, the actresses, the working, women who are either selling themselves or else trying to attract someone who will, because there was a whole dynamic at that exact time period of you could kind of like be plucked out of destitution or the hustle and put into a room rented for you where you're kind of at the whim or the availability of your sponsor, but probably left alone most of the time. There's a complicated number of dimensions to a woman's place in this society at that time that we don't get here, partly because they're treated as secondary characters, I think. But I'm glad you brought it up because there was it was this, was it Celine? It was this is worth recommending a film. Let me see if I can find it. Give me just a second. With we're almost out of time here, but
I can look it up for you too, Peter.
Sure. The director was I'm blanking on proper names right now. It's Colette. Sorry, it's about the writer Colette. But you guys may enjoy this, and Deidre, you in particular, if you don't know this movie. Keira Knightley plays the novelist Colette, who, as a woman writing in that time period, which was, I think, just a couple decades later, either had to publish under a man's name or, you're seeing some really interesting things happen in French culture. I mean, it was people like Rosa Bonheur who dared wear pants for the first time when that's illegal at that time. There's just so many restrictions still put on women, and that kind of locks them into a very limited number of options there. But I guess we're nearly out of time. Justine put a link to Colette there. That movie, if you like this film, that movie is a nice place to kind of go next because it's rich and has a lot of interesting historical context and comes at it, if you want to, talk about perspectives and points of view, it comes at it from a gay male director, but like really looking at the woman's kind of perspective. But we'll be rejoining one another in January. We're doing that edition a little bit early, as we mentioned, because of Sundance. And The movie is getting a lot of attention. Emilia Perez, mostly Spanish language, but a French director, and shot almost entirely in France. You'd never know it, but so I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you for those of you who talked today, and it'll be fun to talk about that movie. That is a very rowdy, audacious, divisive film. So come with opinions. And we'll see you next month. Thank you all.
Au revoir. Bonsoir.
Very good. Thank you so much, Peter. And thanks as always to Renee Ketchum, Isabelle Leroux, and Melissa Sora with the Alliance Française. And thank you to everyone who joined us today and for such a rich discussion of Lost Illusions. We wish you great holidays and a good end to 2024. And we look forward to seeing you in January.